Los Angeles, January 15th, 1947. A young mother pushes a baby stroller down a quiet street in Lima Park. The morning sun is soft, the air cool. She glances toward a vacant lot and freezes. Something pale catches her eye. At first, she thinks it's a mannequin tossed aside. But as she gets closer, the horror sets in. It isn't a mannequin. It's the body of a woman. By that afternoon, news of the discovery spreads like wildfire. Police, reporters, and bystanders swarm the scene. And when the victim is identified, the name Elizabeth Short will never again belong solely to a daughter and a sister. It will become the Black Dahlia, a legend wrapped in horror and mystery. But tonight, let's step away from the myth. Let's remember Elizabeth not as a symbol of one of America's most infamous unsolved murders, but as a young woman from Massachusetts whose family would spend the rest of their lives carrying her absence. Elizabeth Short was born on July 29th, 1924, in Hyde Park, Massachusetts, the third of 5 daughters to Cleo and Phoebe Short. Life was not easy for the Shorts. The Great Depression hit hard. When Elizabeth was just 6 years old, her father disappeared. Cleo abandoned his family without warning, leaving Phoebe to raise the 5 girls alone. Phoebe worked tirelessly, sewing, clerking, doing whatever she could to put food on the table. Elizabeth, nicknamed Bet, grew up in this atmosphere of quiet resilience. She was delicate as a child. Asthma and lung problems often left her weak, and winters in Massachusetts made her condition worse. Doctors suggested a change of environment. So Elizabeth spent several winters in Florida with family friends. But despite her frailty, people noticed her striking appearance. Pale porcelain skin, jet black hair, bright, searching blue eyes. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, even as a teenager. Her sisters remembered her as imaginative, romantic, sometimes restless. She loved movies, and Hollywood seemed like another world, a place where reinvention was possible. By the early 1940s, Elizabeth was a young woman searching for a place in a rapidly changing world. World War II was reshaping America. Men were overseas, and women were taking on new roles at home. Elizabeth left Massachusetts and began drifting, Florida, California, and back again. She worked as a waitress, sometimes as a cashier. She dated servicemen, often looking for stability but also adventure. Letters she sent home to Phoebe painted a picture of a girl both ambitious and vulnerable. She wrote of jobs that didn't last, apartments that weren't permanent, and friends who came and went. Still, the dream of Hollywood lingered. By 1946, she was living in Los Angeles, staying with acquaintances, and sometimes depending on boyfriend for support. Life was unstable, but she seemed determined not to return to the small-town life she had left behind. On January 15th, 1947, Elizabeth's story ended in a way so brutal it shocked even hardened detectives. Her body was found in a vacant lot, severed at the waist, drained of blood, and posed with chilling precision. The lab quickly realized this was unlike any other crime they had seen. Investigators speculated about surgical skill, ritualistic motives, or deranged killers seeking attention. But behind every grim theory, one fact remained. Elizabeth Short was just 22 years old. News of Elizabeth's death traveled quickly, but her mother, Phoebe Short, didn't hear it from the police. 2 reporters from the Boston Record showed up at her door. They told her Elizabeth had won a beauty contest in Los Angeles. Excited, Phoebe shared stories about her daughter, her childhood, her love of movies, her dreams. Then the reporters revealed the truth. Her daughter wasn't being celebrated. She had been murdered. Phoebe's shock turned to grief, then to outrage. Her daughter's life had ended in violence, and strangers had exploited her pain just to get a story. And within hours, Elizabeth's name and face were splashed across headlines from coast to coast. The investigation was massive. Hundreds of suspects were questioned. More than 50 people confessed, though nearly all were false. Detectives chased leads that stretched from Los Angeles to San Diego, but nothing stuck. Yet the case wasn't just about evidence. It became a feeding frenzy for the press. Reporters dubbed Elizabeth the Black Dahlia, a nickname inspired by a film called The Blue Dahlia and her dark hair and wardrobe. Newspapers painted her as a dangerous woman who lived recklessly, an adventuress who courted trouble. But the truth was much simpler and sadder. Elizabeth was a young woman struggling to find her way, often lonely, often broke, no different from countless others who came to Los Angeles with dreams. For a family, the headlines were unbearable. Every news story twisted Elizabeth's image, turning her into a caricature rather than the person they knew. Phoebe Short never fully recovered from her daughter's murder. She continued working, continued raising her remaining daughters, but grief shadowed every day of her life. Elizabeth's sisters, Virginia, Dorothea, Muriel, and Eleanor, grew up with a constant reminder that the world remembered their sister not for her laughter, not for her letters home, but for the cruelty of her death. Each new book, each new documentary, each Hollywood adaptation reopened the wound. For the Shorts, it was as if Elizabeth was taken from them over and over again. They wanted the world to remember her differently, not as a Black Dahlia, but as Elizabeth. The Black Dahlia murder remains unsolved to this day. Theories continue to surface. Suspects are still debated, and the fascination with the case has never faded. But beyond the gruesome details and endless speculation lies the truth of who Elizabeth Short was. A daughter, a sister, a dreamer who wanted more from life. The tragedy of her story isn't just that her killer was never caught. It's that her life, her family, and her humanity were overshadowed by a nickname and a crime scene. Remembering her as Elizabeth, not as a symbol, may be the closest thing to justice her family will ever receive. And so, when we hear the name the Black Dahlia, maybe we should pause and think not of the crime, not of the mystery, but of a family in Massachusetts who lost a daughter and a sister, ordinary people who spent decades carrying an extraordinary grief. Because at the center of this infamous case is not just a victim. There was once a person, and her name was Elizabeth Short.